Sipping wine.
Okay, here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Brian DePalma is with us, and the movie is Casualties of War. Something I want to say to you. We've had conversations in the past. Out of the 19 feature films you've given us so far, my personal favorite has always been Blowout. Doesn't mean I didn't like The Untouchables. I didn't laugh at Wise Guys. And to go through all of them in the conversations I've had with you over the years, but I believe that Casualties of War is a great movie. And one of the things that happened the other evening, sitting in a very crowded theater, was that the movie ended, and the audience sat there in a state of stunned, disturbed, introspective silence. And the feeling was really one of great sorrow. And that the title Casualties of War referred to every principle in that movie. And I thought, from what I knew and read about you and this movie, that was what you were aiming for.
That's right. That's very true. That's exactly the way it was constructed, and that was why the title was repeated at the end.
Strange, you know, because you say, Brian, and I say this to you, everything I say to you, I say, and I think it's very important, and I argued this point with someone the other night about the movie, that I sit in a theater in California, I'm a Canadian citizen. My concept of the Vietnam War revolves around the young Americans I met who came to live in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And I listened to them talk about why they were in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So when I see Casualties of War, I don't see it as Vietnam, the sore that will never heal. I see it as a continuation of a story that I've heard people tell with a glass of wine in their hands, a hamburger. I'm not aware of the horror, and yet you do say that Vietnam is the sore that will never heal. Why will it never heal?
I don't think it will ever heal because it's a war that is so ambivalent, and there's so many ambiguities involved with it, and so many sort of visions of it, and we can't really get a handle on why we were there, why we lost. That part of the world is like a great mystery to us, and it also has a lot to do with, it sort of taught us that we can't win every war we're in. And that was a kind of a sobering experience for America. It's the complexity of the place. We suddenly got into an area where we didn't quite understand all the things going on, and consequently we operated in a way that was not like American, straightforward, this is good, this is evil, and let's resolve this situation. There was something very mysterious and many layered about the whole experience over there. It reminds me of something I read recently about sort of a Vietnamese proverb is, when the water rises, the fish eat the ants. When the water falls, the ants eat the fish. And it was sort of funny because they were trying to find proverbs that were sort of similar to our proverbs. And they couldn't find any sort of, there's a silver lining and half glass full, half glass empty, kind of those sort of upbeat kind of ways that we sort of like to look at life. They have a very complex way of looking at it. So it gives an insight into the fact that this is a very complex world that we were trying to cut our way into and resolve. And we sort of got caught in the quagmire. And it's a quagmire that never resolves itself. And we learned that the world was more complicated than we ever imagined.
You said something else, too, very revealing about you and Casualties of War. You did not go to Vietnam,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the contributing factors was an asthmatic condition.
Mm-hmm.
But you arranged yourself in your life so that you managed to ingest or take everything that would exacerbate your asthmatic condition. You did have asthma, I should point out.
Oh, yeah.
And then you talk about not having had the Vietnam experience, but you do know people who have. including the brilliant, award-winning playwright, screenwriter, David Rabe, who wrote this screenplay for you. And you say that you look into the eyes of people who have been in Vietnam, including David Rabe, and you see something behind his eyes or their eyes that is not behind yours.
Right.
What is it, Brian? I mean,
It's an experience that they have been through that they cannot explain. It's like somebody talking about their LSD trip. They went somewhere, they experienced something so intense, so earth-shattering, so heart-rending, and they try to explain it, but you, in your love and compassion for the person, are trying to understand what they're talking about, but because you haven't been there, it's one of those experiences that never quite translates. And that's why we will constantly be re-examining Vietnam, because we looked at it from afar for the most part, for most of us. We saw it on television, we had politicians telling us about it, we had generals telling us about it, we had correspondents telling us about it, but we never got a handle on it ourselves. So it's difficult for us to interpret or understand the experience. And when you look into the eyes of people that have been there, it's like they have seen something we have not seen. And they can't really ever sort of explain it to us. So that's why there's so many interpretations in an attempt to try to bring this experience home to us.
Brian, have you been to Washington? Have you seen the wall?
No, I haven't.
Just curious, because Norman Jewison told an extraordinary story about doing Bobby Ann Mason's In Country and going there. And again, I speak of a Canadian citizen whose life has been lived around the world, but indeed his soul is that of a Canadian. And here he is immersed, as he was for many years, in American politics, now doing a uniquely American story.
Right.
And he went there and he went to the wall. And something he could never articulate happened to him. And I was only curious if you had been there. Something else I want to point out about you. Sit in front of you and talk about your 19th movie. And one thinks Brian DePalma, name, bankable filmmaker, let him do what he wants. And yet the history and the years of development behind Casualties of War is extraordinary, in that when you began working on it, you began working on it for Paramount Pictures. And there was a reluctance at Paramount to finance it. And am I correct in saying that one of the points of reluctance wasn't merely the budget of the movie, but the fact that Michael J. Fox's innocence, boyishness, and youthful persona, both from television and movies, was not what the Paramount executives thought they wanted in this movie? Is all of that fair?
Well, when you put an actor that's built a reputation, you know, from sitcoms on television and comedy movies, they think, well, you know, is the audience going to accept him in this type of role? But I wanted to take all those qualities that his audience observed in him and identified with him and bring that person to Vietnam so that they could look through this situation through Michael's eyes with their strong identification with him. And I think that was particularly effective.
I agree. I think his work in the movie is extraordinary. I know what the qualities were that Michael J. Fox brought with him for Erickson. I also like the reality of knowing that this is something Erickson will be haunted by for the rest of his life. And then one realizes that the real Erickson read the script, signed a release, requested anonymity, and did not want to be affiliated with the movie. What was your reaction? Because you never did meet him in person, did you?
No, I never did.
Did you want to? Would it have
Well, he
meant
wasn't
anything
really
to you?
interested in meeting
No,
us.
yeah.
He just really, I mean, I think he feels that it's an important statement, or he wouldn't have been involved in the writing of the book and giving us a release to make the movie about his life over there. But I don't think he wants to re-experience it himself, for obvious reasons. It's like 25 years since it happened, and it's like he wants to put it behind him.
When Michael J. Fox talks about being in Thailand and being in the jungles, and talks about it being 6 months of being in hell, and that between the physicality, draining, of being in the jungle where the average temperature was 100 degrees on a good day, and the emotional draining of the material, what were you able to do as the father figure, which indeed you were for these guys, to keep them up, to keep the, I mean the energy and the sense of intent, just to keep them going on days when they must have felt...
I'd say that the thing that kept them going, besides their belief in the material, because that sort of falls away within a few days when you have to sort of drag yourself back and forth to these arduous locations in all this heat, is they saw the rushes and they saw their work was very good and they were very excited about what they were doing. I remember Michael saying that to me, and Sean saying a similar thing, that if they didn't have the rushes to see every once in a while, to see all the suffering was going into making something that they thought was extraordinary, I don't know how they would have gotten through it.
Something else too, when I think of you being in Thailand, 500 people every day sitting on a set eating, being taken care of, you surrounded by many people in your unit who've worked with you often, and that the crew members were men and women from Paris, Chicago, Borneo, and Toronto, and that I know that Wolf Kroger, your production designer, is from Montreal. But who were, I don't mean specifically the names, but how many Canadians were involved? When crew members from Toronto, were there a number?
Well, I think Wolf brought a lot, but we had essentially an English crew, and then Wolf in his department brought people from, I think, Canada.
So there was indeed Canadian content.
Oh, yeah.
Along, after Michael J. Fox.
Yeah.
While I'm saying that to you, I sit in front of you and I think, Brian DePalma, you've got Michael J. Fox starring with Sean Penn in Casualties of War. I certainly know what you've done with Geneviève Bujold in Obsession and the wonderful work she did for you. Margot Kidder. And when I think of the Canadian content and talent in your films, have you ever almost made a feature in Canada? Have you ever discussed just showing up in Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and making a movie?
Well, you have to find the right story to tell in those places. I think the locales are fascinating, except for the fact that Toronto's being used as a sort of every other city in the United States now. They're kind of shooting it to death because we see it as Chicago, as New York, as San Francisco, as
We're waiting,
Baltimore,
Brian, to see it as Toronto.
Well, David Cronenberg did that.
David
Audacious
yes.
statement.
No, that's true. David did. David did. Have you met David Cronenberg?
Yes,
Are you
I have.
friends?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And when I saw the title at the beginning of the movie, present-day Toronto, it was like, my God, there's a statement.
I think the first time we saw that at the Toronto Film Festival, the audience burst into applause because it was a moment of, my God, it's really us.
Yes.
And we're not being disguised.
That's right.
You know, as Marlon Brando and Matthew Broderick run through the streets of Toronto.
Right. Exactly.
But you know what I was thinking? I was remembering the story and the passion you had at one point for wanting to tell the Yablonsky story of the United Mine Workers reformist leader and the murder of his family and that extraordinary position you got yourself in professionally when you took on Flashdance, believing number one, it would be commercial.
Right.
Number two, if you did it, they'd give you the money for the Yablonsky murder story.
No. That's
No?
not exactly how that happened.
Tell the truth. What really happened?
Well, the fact is I developed a script on the Yablonsky murders called Act of Vengeance, and when I went to meet the executives, they were very excited about the script. That's what usually doesn't happen. They usually say, well, we're excited about this movie, but the script needs work. When they say that we love the script, that means, my God, they're actually thinking about making the movie. So then I said, my God, they're going to make this movie. It's taken years, but my God, they're going to make it. And then I went back to my hotel room, and about 3 hours later, I got a call, and the executive was on the phone, and he said, I want to say one word to you. And I said, is he going to say go? Is he going to say, we're making this picture, congratulations? And he said, Flashdance. And I said, what? He said, Flashdance. We're very excited about you doing Flashdance over here. So I said, oh, I don't believe this. What about Act of Vengeance? And he said, oh, well, we're thinking about that, but we are very excited about Flashdance. And that's how that came to me. And I was so irritated at them for not doing Act of Vengeance and offering me Flashdance. I made them make me a firm offer, whatever it was, and as soon as I got it, I turned them down.
Am I allowed to bring up something you told me about a long time ago that I thought you were going to do in London? There was a science fiction novel, The Demolished Man.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Is there still a script somewhere on
There are
Demolished
many
Man?
scripts of The Demolished Man, and it keeps on coming back to me over the years. I've been thinking about it since I was in high school, basically, and I don't know. It's like maybe I've worked on it too many decades. It's a great science fiction material, but it's a very expensive movie to make, and you got to come up with a whole way of doing telepathy. And I ponder it all the time.
Brian, have you still got that Bolex camera you bought when you were trading in all your computer gadgetry after winning second prize at a science fair in Los Angeles?
Right.
You still got that original camera you bought? Is it on a
I'm
shelf
trying
somewhere?
to think. I'm trying to think where that Bolex is.
Well, so far I think I only know you have two homes, New York and L.A. Is it in either?
No. If it isn't in either, it probably doesn't exist.
Did you give it to Sarah Lawrence for the museum?
I may have, because I know I don't have it in either one of my houses.
You know, Casualties of War is available to moviegoers, and it's something that has to be pointed out because of the extraordinary press Dawn Steele has received as an executive at Columbia Pictures. I mean, they've written satirical things about the boss from hell, Steely Dawn, the woman with the power hair, and yet she was the woman who, in her position at Columbia Pictures, made Casualties of War the first feature film under her
Regime.
Exactly.
That's true.
And she was with you at those early screenings,
Mm-hmm.
sitting in movie theaters,
Mhm.
along with friends like Steven Spielberg,
Mm-hmm.
wanting it to be the movie you wanted it to be.
That's right.
And I take it that you have a unique opinion about Dawn Steele as an executive.
Yes, she was a very audacious executive. This is a hard movie to stand behind because of all the kind of, do we need another Vietnam movie, and isn't this material too tough, and our audience is going to respond to it. And I think she saw in it the same kind of strength and power and emotionality that I did, and loved the casting and said, let's make this one. And it's always a bit of a miracle when movies like this get made.
I thank you for Casualties of War, and I wait patiently to see what you will do with Tom Wolfe's extraordinary piece of work, Bonfire of the Vanities. And I hope that you'll drop in, as you often have in the past, as a guest in Toronto during this film festival in September. And maybe you'll see Jewison's in Country,
I
or
certainly would
Walter
love to see
Hill's
it.
Johnny Handsome,
Yep.
or Jean-Jacques Hano's The Bear, or all of those other filmmakers' work. It's a pleasure to see you
Looking
again.
forward to it.
Thank you. Enjoyed talking to
you.
you. Brian DePalma, Casualties of War. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good
Pleasure.
to see you again.
I remember one night when you were sitting in the back of the House of Chan